Shabbat Shalom. So he was perhaps the most famous American before the Revolutionary War. He was a scientist, an inventor, a philosopher, and a diplomat. He was one of the founders of the United States. And though he was a devout believer in God, he was not a good Presbyterian, which was the denomination of Christianity in which he was raised. He was a real product of the Enlightenment, allowing his faith to be shaped by the contours of modern scientific knowledge. His face has adorned the United States $100 bill since 1929, so by now I'm sure you've guessed that I'm talking about Benjamin Franklin. On this Shabbat, anticipating American Independence Day this coming Tuesday, I thought I'd share with you some things about this American patriot, and particularly an unusual aspect of his relationship with the Jewish people that many people may not have heard about. In a very amazing and an unbelievable way, Benjamin Franklin gave a kind of gift to us, a kind of a spiritual gift. But before I tell you what this gift was, you need to recall that Benjamin Franklin knew the Hebrew Scriptures really well, what we call the Bible. He had suggested that the Great Seal of America depict Moses standing on the shore of the Red Sea while Pharaoh drowns in his chariot in its midst. The motto at the bottom of the seal would have read, "Rebellion to tyrants is obedience to God." You see, Franklin was among those founding fathers who saw in the American Revolution a replaying of the story of the Jewish exodus from Egypt. King George III was Pharaoh. George Washington was Moses. The Atlantic Ocean was the Red Sea. And it was as if God were saying to King George, "Let my American people go." It's also important to point out that when the Jewish community in Philadelphia built their synagogue, which they named Mikveh Israel, Franklin actually contributed to the building fund himself. But that's not the gift I'm talking about tonight. So what was this gift? Well, Franklin wrote an autobiography that was published a year after his death in 1791. And in the second half of his biography, Franklin included a section called Rules of Conduct. And what Franklin proposed for his rules of conduct was a list of 13 virtues that he wished to promote and instill in himself. But he realized that merely listing these virtues was not going to actually change his behavior. So he devised a journal system using a chart that listed all 13 virtues down the left side in a column, and then he made 7 columns across the page for each of the 7 days of the week. And each night before he would go to sleep, he would put a black dot in the column for that day on the row of any of the virtues that he had transgressed that day. 1 dot for each transgression. Some of them probably got kind of black in the square there. But anyway, he listed the virtues in the order that he wished to work on them, and he focused on 1 virtue every week for 13 weeks. And then he would cycle through those virtues 4 times. So if you've done the math, 4 times 13 is 52, so that by the end of the year, he had cycled through all 13 virtues 4 times. So what were these 13 virtues that that Benjamin Franklin was determined to develop within himself? Well, here they are. Number 1, temperance in eating and drinking. This is the essence of a good diet, among other things. Number 2, silence. Only speak when it's actually useful or helpful to do so. Don't engage in idle chatter. I'm imagining that that's pretty difficult for most of us. Number 3, order. Keep your things organized and have fixed times to do your various tasks. Number 4, resolution. Be determined to follow through on the things that you need to accomplish. By the way, if you want a list of these, just email me. I'll send them to you. But you have to make the chart, otherwise it's not going to help, I think. Number 5, frugality. Spend money only on the things that will actually benefit yourself or others. Don't be wasteful. Number 6, industry. Always be engaged in doing something useful. Do not waste time on unnecessary activities. I'm kind of wondering what Franklin would say about video games or Netflix or TikTok. Anyway, number 7, sincerity. Do not cause harm with lies and deceit. Think innocently and justly, and if you speak, speak accordingly. Number 8, justice. Do the right thing and do not hurt others by doing something unfair. Number 9, moderation. Avoid the extremes and do not be so easily offended or hurt by what other people do or say. Number 10, cleanliness in body, clothing, and habitation. Number 11, tranquility. What we might say today, don't sweat the small stuff. And don't get upset by common or unavoidable accidents. Number 12, chastity. Well, I guess I don't need to explain that one. Number 13, humility. On this virtue, Benjamin Franklin's own comment was, imitate Jesus and Socrates. Okay, so it's not a bad list, and except for the references to Jesus and Socrates at the end, it could have been a list put together by, say, a Polish rabbi of the 18th century. And in fact, that's almost exactly what happened. I mentioned that Benjamin Franklin's diary was first published in 1791. It was distributed widely all over the United States, became a bestseller, and then it went to Europe, to England, to France, to Italy, to Germany, to Spain, even to Holland. And then Ben Franklin's diary was published in Poland, where a Jew picked up a copy and read it, and deciding that this was just an amazing idea, and he had to share it with his landsmen, the Jews of Poland. So he published a book called Sefer Cheshbon HaNefesh, the Book of Accounting of the Soul. It was printed in 1808. It was sort of a book about moral and spiritual improvement, and in the book he reproduced Franklin's grid of 13 virtues and 7 days of the week, and he described how a person should work on one virtue each week for 13 weeks, just the way Franklin had done. By the way, he also credited Benjamin Franklin. So who was this Jew, and how did he get a hold of a copy of Ben Franklin's diary? Although the author did not sign his name to the book, we now know who wrote it. His name was Menachem Mendel Leffin, and he was not an Orthodox Jew. He was not a Hasidic Jew. He actually was what we call a maskil, that is, an enlightened Jew. That is, he was very much like Benjamin Franklin. Menachem Mendel was a product of the Enlightenment. A disciple of Moses Mendelssohn, Leffin wanted to preserve traditional Judaism while introducing Jewish readers to modern scientific and general literature. And Leffin's adaptation of Franklin was so successful that Polish Jews during the 1800s called Franklin, Benjamin Franklin, they called him the Musar Chacham of Philadelphia. Musar means it was the Jewish ethical movement that was trying to make people better. Chacham is the Hebrew word for a sage, and of course he was from Philadelphia, so they called him the Musar Chacham of Philadelphia. Franklin himself had prefaced his little journal with some quotations and prayers, including this quotation from the book of Proverbs. Length of days is in her right hand, and in her left hand riches and honor. Her ways are ways of pleasantness, and all her paths are peace. That probably sounds familiar to many of us because we sing it in Hebrew every time we return the Torah to the Ark. Darcheha darchei noam v'kol netivoteha shalom. Her ways are ways of pleasantness, and all her paths are peace. And then he included this prayer that I think he made up. Father of light and life, thou good supreme, teach me what is good. Teach me thyself. Save me from folly, vanity, and vice, from every low pursuit, and fill my soul with knowledge, conscious peace, and virtue pure, sacred, substantial, never-fading bliss. What a marvelous prayer, and very similar to a prayer that we recite every morning in the early morning prayer section of our prayer book. Now, Benjamin Franklin, with all of his monumental achievements during his lifetime, was not actually what we would call a saintly, pure person. I don't know if you've read biographies of him, but some of his character traits were less than ideal. He was known to be, shall we say, flirtatious. He admitted in his diary that he tended to be arrogant, and he talked quite a bit, often engaging in idle chatter, which is one of his 13 principles. But he was a man who apparently recognized his shortcomings and he was willing and even determined to try and improve himself. I find it remarkable that this prescription for self-improvement coming from an enlightened American Christian crossed the Atlantic Ocean, was translated by an enlightened Jew in Poland, and became part of classic literature in Jewish Musar, the school of morality and character building that is now popular in the Jewish world. Menachem Mendel Levin, by the way, fits precisely in the mold of what we call today conservative Judaism. That's us. The stream of Jewish thinking that fervently believes in science and the Enlightenment, but continues to preserve and to adapt Jewish tradition to the modern world, which goes to show that conservative Judaism's essential principles have played a crucial role in the continuing development of modern Judaism. But perhaps a more important lesson we can learn from this tiny slice of Jewish history is the famous dictum of the sage Ben Zoma from Pirkei Avot, chapters of the Fathers. Ezehu Chacham, who is the Chacham, who is the wise one, who is the sage? Halamed Mikol Adam, the one who learns from everyone. To cut ourselves off from the wisdom of others, either because they're not Jewish or because they are Jewish but from a different movement, would be a terrible mistake. True wisdom is gained by recognizing truth wherever it can be found. In his diary, Benjamin Franklin expressly stated that he intended his method to be used by people of all religions. He truly saw in all faiths the desire to do God's will. In recent years, there's been a resurgence of interest in the Jewish Musar movement, and there are many books and programs that have been published and created to teach this wisdom. And if you're interested, again, you can email me, and I will give you some suggestions. On July 4th, 1788, Franklin was too sick and too weak to get out of bed. But the Independence Day parade in Philadelphia marched right under his window. And, as Franklin himself had directed, the clergy of different Christian denominations with the Rabbi of the Jews walked arm in arm. And when he was carried to his grave 2 years later, his casket was accompanied by all the clergymen of the city, every one of them of every faith. So this year on July 4th, let's celebrate the wonderful country that we live in with the brilliant founding fathers whose wisdom inspired the principles on which it was founded, including the Chacham of Philadelphia, Benjamin Franklin. And perhaps we can also consider learning about Jewish Musar, a program that helps us to improve our own spirituality and our own moral character traits.